Okay, everyone, let's get started. My name's Katerina, and I'm the new Director of Development for the Noyo Science Center. So I'm brand new to this place and very, very glad to serve the Centers for Marine Science. As I bet all of you know, the Noyo Center's mission is to advance ocean conservation through education, exploration, and experience. And one of the things that we do is we have these monthly science talks. So tonight, we have a really neat one about sharks. We have David McGuire here. He is the founder of Stewards. He has a really interesting background in history. And I'm going to let David introduce himself and tell you a little bit about him before we delve into his history and learn all things sharks for the night. So thanks so much for being here. And I'm turning it over to you, David. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Katerina and Trey. One of these days, I'd like to get back to the Noyo Center. It's a beautiful spot, a lot of friends up there. Actually, maybe show a film. But it's great to talk to you all. And I'll just share my screen and tell you about myself. So my name is David McGuire. I'm the director and founder of Stewards. We are part of the Earth Island Institute based in Berkeley, California. So we are a nonprofit working in marine conservation, but we educate and use science and apply that towards advocacy and policy. So we work in legislation, regulation, and motivation, and trying to engage the community to convince lawmakers or sometimes consumers or people who are fishing to act more sustainably. And so I'll get into a little bit of that, but really I just want to talk about sharks and celebrate sharks and some of the work that we've been doing, not only in our policy work, but also with sharks, but also with marine conservation and marine protection. So a lot of our work is in media production and writing. I'm a documentary filmmaker. We do short stories, but also new documentaries. We engage community science, doing pattern recognition or getting people in the water, but also on the ground, collecting data on trade of harvests or also trade of shark fins, which is one of the largest threats to sharks globally. We introduced the California shark fin ban, which was sponsored by now Congressman Huffman, who is your congressman, and Paul Fong, he was an assemblyman, to educate our Asian American community, but also to regulate the throughput of sharks, particularly of endangered shark species. We work in California, but also internationally and throughout the Pacific, including back in Hawaii in the past few years, working on community-based marine protected areas, reef fish harvesting, human behavior and interactions through tourism, but also doing some work with local communities on shark pattern ID. One of the most important things actually is engaging youth and community towards awareness, towards addressing problems like plastic pollution, and inspiring action through either reducing wildlife disturbance, reducing plastic pollution, engagement, education to hopefully perpetuate and accelerate ocean health and ocean protection. This is a teaser that's on our website, our Shark Stewards website. We have a YouTube channel as well with hundreds of videos if you're interested, including films that we've produced over the years. So I want to celebrate National Marine Sanctuary Day today. It's almost 52 years of our National Marine Sanctuaries, which of course are a large marine protected area, federally managed. our mission is to protect critically endangered sharks and rays through policy regulation and fishing mitigation, but also to protect critical marine habitat. And we've been involved with the Greater Farallones and the Cordell Bank, where I was a advisor. Now they're kind of lumped together since the expansion of over 5,000 square miles of federally managed marine protected areas. And of course, the Farallon Islands, which is one of the largest aggregations of white sharks on the planet, and seasonally aggregation. So we call these months when the sharks return and forage Sharktober. But we do want to recognize the work that many people before us, including Leon Panetta, who was a congressman all the way up to Secretary of State, and is still active as his son is in marine protection off the California coastline. We're fortunate to have 4 national marine sanctuaries, now 5, celebrating the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary that was just released and approved by NOAA. It needs to go through our Congress, but hopefully after the election, there'll be a strong environmental ethos and a bipartisan House or Senate that will pass not only this, but another sanctuary I'd like to talk about later. Sanctuaries are federally managed. As I said, they really regulate exploitation of natural resources like oil and bottom mineral deposits and bottom trawling. But there is fishing allowed in our national marine sanctuaries, and some are species-based, like the Humpback Hawaiian Islands, the Hawaiian Island Humpback Whale Sanctuary off Maui and Hawaii. The first one was 52 years ago. The Monitor, which is a historical protected area of one of the old ironclads during World War II off of Cape Hatteras. And so now there are 17 through the Great Lakes all the way down to the Rose Atoll in the South Pacific, and of course 4 off our coast and many off the East Coast and Florida and the Gulf as well. So the Chumash Heritage, which is the first true heritage culturally protected area that is driven by the Chumash tribe down off the south central coast, from about Morro Bay down to Gaviota, where there are many sacred sites, including caves, petroglyphs, areas of prayer, largely driven by the native community as well as the environmental community to really protect this beautiful coastline from development that would severely impact wildlife, which includes whales and other species like sharks. So this is Moro Rock, or Nisamu in the Chumash tongue, and it's a sacred rock which the colonists, or the modern day colonialists, meaning modern day Americans, blasted for quarry. But there's about 2/3 of it left, and now it's protected. And now the nearshore coastline will be protected as well. So this is Sharktober. Happy Sharktober. This is when we celebrate the return of our white sharks off of our coastline here off the north and central coast of California, and also off Baja California, which shares this population of around 1,500 or so white sharks, Carcharodon carcharinus. Most people know them as great white sharks, but great is superfluous. If you ever see a pregnant female or a large shark like this, that can be 4,000 to 5,000 pounds and 17 or 18 feet long, and 4,000 or 5,000 pounds, they truly are great. Of course, they get our attention, especially this time of year after this amazing migration, because they are mostly a surface behavioral shark. They tend to co-inhabit nearshore environments with surfers and swimmers and fishermen off our coastline, because they're here for their favorite prey, which are air breathers, which are primarily the pinnipeds, the northern elephant seal, fur seals, harbor seals, and sea lions, but also dead whales, which they will forage on, mostly in the fall to late winter months, and then they disappear on this amazing migration and then return, at least the adult males do annually during the late summer, peaking out around now in October. So we coined this phrase. As a surfer, I've been around this coast surfing for a long time and really branded it and used it to educate and celebrate the return of these sharks as opposed to maligning them and fearing them, which was a bit of the hangover since the Jaws era and in the 70s and 80s when there was full-scale bounty on these sharks, and we almost extirpated them or caused a local extinction event in this population, bottlenecked them severely, but they have been protected for almost 50 years now and are just now really expanding and recovering. Off our coastline, we have primarily adults and subadults, but we're seeing the juveniles push north also, somewhat, we believe, associated with increased sea surface temperatures and climate change. So this is a subpopulation of the same species that is a global species that's been separated, at least from the south, population off New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa for about 200,000 years. They are distinct. They do not cross the equator, but they do interact and exchange genetic material, meaning they copulate and reproduce with the Guadalupe and Sea of Cortez population off of the Baja Peninsula. So all told, this is the same population of Northeast Pacific white sharks. And we know this, a lot of this, from some of the early seminal work by Peter Pyle and Scott Anderson off of the Farallon Islands, who started to observe more predation events from the island, which is a fish and wildlife refuge in our Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. And Peter's a bird biologist, an ornithologist who's still active. And he started observing these predation events, these big red footprints of white sharks, and they started to increase over the years. So they went out with Scott and started taking photographs, doing pattern ID from the dorsal fins, kind of documenting the numbers, but also where did they go? They would leave in January or February, and you know, by March they're almost entirely gone. But without the tools, which are now more modern technologies, like such as spot tags or the shark satellite, or sorry, the satellite tags, which are implanted on the dorsal fin or in the musculature and send a signal every time the shark signals. We get these ideas of location. And so a lot of that work was done by Sal Jorgensen and the Barbara Block lab down at Stanford, the tagging Pacific predators, along with Monterey Aquarium scientists, and revealed that these sharks are heading southwest to an area that was termed the White Shark Cafe or shared foraging area, offshore foraging area, and they're milling around. And with recent data, they're actually diving and potentially consuming giant squid or some of the animals that are involved with the mesophotic zone, the deeper waters that have this deep scattering layer that come up during the night hours. Some sharks make it to Hawaii also, and the native Hawaiians knew about these sharks. And some of the early biologists, white shark biologists, pretty much thought that white sharks were a temperate species only, and they hung around their prey, which are primarily northern elephant seals here in our population, and that they didn't go into the tropics. Well, they do go into the tropics, and if you ask the native Hawaiians a long time ago, they would have told you because they actually used some of the teeth in their war clubs. There's mythology around these sharks, and of course, with the modern technology and now actually observation of these sharks, they do reach the Northwest Hawaiian Islands and the main Hawaiian Islands, but that's very rare. Typically, they're in this area. They're probably reproducing, feeding if they can. We know they come back skinny. Some, like this track, which was a female, do the Great Circle route over the Pacific High. And that's right where this area is, which is also what we call the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's in the gyre. And the females stay away from the feeding areas for over 2 years. They have a year gestation period. They come down to Southern California or off of Baja in the Bay of Biscayno, or in the Sea of Cortez, where it's warmer, shallower, and they're gestating. They give live birth to anywhere between 2 to 6 fully formed sharks, and then they return onto the migration and return back to the feeding area the next year. So the female large sharks, adult sharks, are seen every other year when they're in that reproductive mode. And so we like to celebrate them. We created the Sharktober Fest event. This is, I think, the 15th year with the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. And this is part of what Shark Stewards does, is trying to educate people that we shouldn't be scared of sharks. We should be scared for them. Although white sharks are recovering, they are a threatened species. They are not endangered, but they are still on the brink and could be easily overfished because of that low fecundity or reproductive capacity, long gestation period, and slow onset of reproduction, as late as 15 years for females. Uh, they are vulnerable to overfishing, and it's very easy to crash a population of shark, which is why 1/3 of shark species are threatened with extinction today, particularly the large pelagic sharks or the large sharks that, like the mako, like the blue, that can be coastal or near shore, but cross the ocean and are entrained as bycatch or sometimes as direct catch for shark fin in longline and purse seine fishing industries. So we have a number of infographics about how low the relative risk is because we live in what's called the red triangle. You guys are Point Arena, sort of what's considered the northern boundary, which is really based on statistics of shark human encounters or shark attacks between around Big Sur, Farallones being the westernmost part of the triangle, up to Point Arena. And that's where about 40% or so fatalities have been documented in the United States of white on white sharks. And typically when you get bit by a white shark, it's a serious bite, but most people survive off our coastline, around 90%. And there have only been, this is old data, I think it's 213 recorded incidents since Fish and Wildlife and other scientists have started recording this population interacting with humans. Of course, in that same period, in this case, 1950, these are California Fish and Wildlife statistics, the human population has expanded by about 4 times at least, from 2 million to whatever it is now. So of course, there are a lot of people interacting in the nearshore environment with sharks. And so there are more observations, there are more spottings, probably thanks to social media and technology like GoPros and drones. But the statistical increase has not changed. So on average, there's a bite about every other year and a fatality about every 5 years off of our coastline, which if you compare that to driving accidents or diving accidents or swimming accidents, swimming drownings are around 1,500 a year in California because there's a lot of people in the water. So the risk is actually relatively low, around 1 in 17 million for surfers, which are the highest risk group off of California in, that was a Stanford study done by Ferretti et al. And so the risk is very, very low. And yet, if you listen to the news or the media, you think sharks are everywhere. There's a regular Sharknado killing sharks. So Sharktober is really about an opportunity for us and hopefully others to educate about the risk of sharks and understand them and also reduce their risk through through our own behavior. And if you want to learn more, I'll put a link on the 10 steps we've developed with other scientists or just through common sense on how to avoid getting bit by a white shark. So I really want to talk about shark diversity because there's so much interest in white sharks right now because it is Sharktober, but there's only a few hundred out there. So they're really not that common compared to other species. And there's a lot we don't know about the importance of other species. We don't pay attention to them. And yet we also don't know how important they are to the health of the marine ecosystem. We have many species of elastoranks, which are the suborder of sharks and rays, and the skates that are their relatives, the flat sharks. There are around 550 species of what we consider the selaciformed or morphs, the true sharks, the sharky sharks that have that beautiful fusiform body, big fins, big muscles, typically fast swimming predators. Not all. But we also, most of these are represented by the batoids, which is the group that has the skates and rays. So we call those the flat sharks. Uh, Commonly, the salmon shark comes off our coastline to pursue their favorite prey, which is, of course, salmon. They're piscivores. They look a lot like a white shark and are commonly confused with juvenile great white sharks. Often I'll get a phone call and they'll say there's a great white shark swimming near shore or in the San Francisco Bay. And I'll say, well, how big is that? It's like, well, it's like 6 or 7 feet. It's like, no, there are very few 6 or 7 feet. Those are young of year. Great white sharks, which are typically south. Uh, that's probably a salmon shark, which are darker bodied. They have actually kind of a pinkish underbody as opposed to truly white. Their fins are rounder, but they're a large shark and they go all the way up to Alaska and the Bering Sea to feed on salmon and travel back south in the winter months. Mako sharks migrate up off the coast, typically a warmer water shark. They're following these tongues of warm water during the blob or El Nino. We're seeing more of them, typically offshore, following albacore and yellowfin tuna and bluefin tuna, which are also expanding their range north due to higher sea surface temperatures. Blue sharks, which is a pelagic species, the highest large number by volume in the shark fin trade at around 20 million. Uh, One of the most abundant large sharks are getting killed all over the world for their fins, also as pet food and fertilizers. They're not very palatable. They're a gorgeous shark, and they have an important role in the offshore and the pelagic and what's called the neritic ecosystem, which is more the surface dwelling zone. Thresher sharks, there are 3 species, at least 2 visit our waters. Basking shark, which is one of the few filter feeders. Cedarinas, they actually are not a whale, like a whale shark. They are a fish, but their feeding behavior is very much like a whale. They're slow moving, they're surface feeders. They gulp gallons, tens or hundreds of gallons of seawater and filter it past their modified gill rakers and then swallow the krill or larval fish. These are endangered, extremely rare. They were hunted commercially in the 40s and 50s for their livers. They're not very abundant and they're extremely rare. It's hard to find these sharks. Deeper water sharks like the 7-gill and the 6-gill can live down thousands of feet, but do come in near shore. In particular, the 7-gill shark, which I've studied, to actually give birth in the San Francisco Bay and some of the coastal estuaries. And they also go down off the continental shelf. So there's sort of a transitional species between the offshore species and the nearshore species. And then, of course, the nearshore sharks, like the hound sharks, which have 4 species off of our coastline. The most recognizable is the beautiful leopard shark, but also the unfortunate but aptly named soup fin shark, named after Chinese American laborers for their desirable fins. And also the brown and gray smoothhound sharks, which are typically more benthic or bottom sharks. They feed on invertebrates, small fish, sometimes dead fish. They come into the estuaries and bays. They probably come up into the front of the Noyo River, I'm sure, or the Albion River, sorry. But they like typically inhabit sandier or soft bottoms, but also come into the nearshore rocky subtidal. Another deeper water shark in the Hexanchidae, the Cladocellaceus, is a frilled shark. It has 6 gills. It's not an eel, but it's eel-like. So Anguinus, the genus, or the species, I'm sorry, is named after eel. They have a very large eye. They engage in this nocturnal migration. They can live very, very deep, 500, 600, 800 meters. They are fish eaters, but also will eat carrion. They will also come near shore, but typically they're more off the continental shelf. The prickly shark is another deeper water shark that is caught near shore. They have a very, very rough skin, shark skin is composed of dentin teeth-like structures called denticles. So they're not scales, but they're like small teeth that are facing backwards, which serve as an armor, also make them more laminar or break the surface tension, as well as deter uh, um, parasite growth. So most sharks are actually very, very clean, except for the really slow-moving sharks. And then the spiny dogfish, which is a shark that can live in the deep water in large schools, but also come into the San Francisco Bay and Monterey Bay and large estuaries to give birth. One of the more long-lived sharks. They can live over 100 years. They're not sexually reproductive until as late as 30 years. They are caught in commercial fisheries primarily for fish and chips, but also for their livers, traditionally for vitamin A, now for their oils for cosmetics and other uses. And then there are kind of the weird subtidal sharks that are near shore, like the Pacific horn shark, which is a bottom feeder, and sometimes you see their egg cases. Theirs are kind of a spiral shape. The swell shark, which is also a near shore shark that lives in rocky subtidal, but also some of the softer bottoms, and they'll eat urchins, they'll eat fish, and they lay these eggs that have one embryo, and there's an example with a small swell shark living off the yolk of the egg like a chicken until they're large enough to uh, eat their way out. They have a specialized tooth kind of that will help them get through this tough chitin case. And sometimes you see these wash ashore if you ever do beach walks, and they're called mermaids' purses. So these are egg layers. Uh, these sharks give live birth. Some sharks, like the blue shark, actually are placental viviparous. So they have a remarkably uh, different reproductive strategy. So they're not like a tuna, which only lay eggs. They put a lot of energy into their young, a lot of effort. For example, the spiny dogfish, their gestation period can be as long as 3 years. And so this amount of investment means that they are less reproductive by numbers, and that makes them more vulnerable to overfishing. Angel sharks, there used to be a big commercial fishery off of the north, central, and also Santa Barbara coastline. That population got completely fished out. It's protected now. They are ambush predators. They resemble a ray, but they are not a ray. They are in the shark group. They have their pectoral or wing fins here are not fused to the body like rays, and they're considered a good eating fish. So they've been harvested for people to eat. Spiny guitarfish is sort of a transitional species between the angel sharks and the true rays. Their pectoral fins are mostly fused, not entirely, but they are a ray like the thornback ray, which is a similar species, and they live on the benthic and the sediments. Thornback guitarfish looks much more like a ray than the spiny guitarfish, which is tuned in B flat. So the bat rays is the more common ray, Myliobatis. These are caught for their wings, and sometimes faux scallops are made out of them. They are considered a good eating fish by some cultures, especially subsistence fishers or people augmenting their diet along our coastline. They're a little bit, I don't know, not very good to me to eat, but I don't eat sharks. The round stingray, of course, which can sting you, has tens of volts and can give quite a shock. These are all, or I'm sorry, the torpedo ray. The round stingray has this nasty stinger that's quite painful, as does the bat ray, and many of these other rays have venomous rays. And then there are the skate, which is a separate group of the batoids, and they have a much larger pectoral fused surface. They have much more of a wing-like, I should say, body shape. They're also much more triangular. They are also a benthic species, but they will fly around off the bottom. These are the largest and the only that actually have, that I know of, that have more than one embryo. They can have as many as 4 embryos in their egg cases, and it's the largest egg case can be like 4 or 5 or 10 centimeters. Uh, and these are typically a deep water species, but they also will come into estuaries or the continental shelf where they are caught and sometimes consumed, but also caught as bycatch in fisheries. So we started a program for education called Shark Watch California, but it was much more about curiosity at first. We were tagging 7-gill sharks in the bay, looking where they went, and we found that the females would go south in the summer months, the winter, I'm sorry. They come into the bay in the summer months and give live birth, and the pups are actually grow in near shore environment. And the females will leave in the fall or winter months and go down south and are seen in San Diego, in Baja. The males, meanwhile, will go north where there's a commercial fishery where they're caught in Canada. But we didn't really know when they come back. We still haven't really elucidated it very well. But what we did start to see is that these sharks that we tagged were ending up in the kelp beds off of particularly La Jolla Cove, but also Point Loma. And so we created this database with Mike Bear and Ocean Sanctuaries and trying to encourage divers to create a community science program because we can match the sharks by their spots. These sharks have this beautiful eye, which is filled with this green, dense rods cells, but also have this mirror membrane called the tapetum lucidium, which give them the eye shine, which focus more light onto the retina, much like cats and deer do on land. So they're adapted to a low light environment, which is unusual to see them in shallow waters. And it could be because the females are gestating still or they're foraging. But they have this unique coloration, of course, being 7-gill sharks in the Hexanchidae. They have 7 gills. It doesn't mean they breathe more. I think they're more of a basal lineage on their way out. There used to be many more species and genera. Now there are only 2 genuses or genera with 4 species extant or living. There used to be over 30 at least described. And so the 7-gill thing is not that they breathe better, or they get more oxygen exchange. It's just more of a evolutionary adaptation that maybe is being surpassed, or there's more of an advantage for having larger 5 gills, like some of the laminated or other more evolved or more recently evolved sharks. So we created this program to try to get data without catching the shark through using this algorithm on photo ID. The white shark scientists did this early on with the dorsal fins doing photographs. This is being used now, this technology, with other species like whale sharks, which have a unique coloration pattern or marking pattern. And so it's a great way to engage people, particularly divers, to learn more about sharks, and maybe even fishermen who might catch the shark, take a photo and let it go. So that's the goal, is to learn more and to figure out how many there are, where they live, and how many are we taking. In the meantime, we're doing a really great job of exploiting them as we other large fish. And so one of the big goals of the world now is to protect more of our ocean. President Biden and our Congress President Biden and his administration has committed to the goals of 30% by 2030. This is set by the Convention of Biological Diversity in the United Nations treaty. We have a long way to go globally. This is actually an old number. The World Database of Protected Areas by the UN says about 8.2. Really, only 2.9% of our oceans are protected under full no-take reserves, like we have off of our California coastline. You can fish in sanctuaries, but there are some restrictions. This is our ocean planet. This is most of the space we have to inhabit. And I think it's stupid to think about going to Mars and putting billions of dollars towards technology when we could really better understand the place where we started as humans and coexist and co-inhabit and better understand and manage the planet we live on. There are over 1 million species, and most of them are undescribed. There's so much to learn and understand about our planet ocean, which leaves great opportunity for our young people to understand, to study, and to have future careers, and maybe even in sustainable exploitation. Typically, that's what we do. We overfish. And fortunately, in California, with better science, we understand that we need to either close a fishery through our National Marine Fisheries Service or our California Fish and Wildlife, or we create protected areas that are no-take reserves. Under the California Marine Life Protected Act of 1999, we have now protected 16% of our coastal waters out to 3 miles and around our islands, 124 MPAs. They're not very big, but with our National Marine Heritage sites, California at least, our waters are well over 30% with 4, now 5 National Marine sanctuaries. But the rest of the world has a long way to catch up. But this network of ecosystem managed, scientifically monitored, and also baseline premise, and connected by currents, these MPAs we see are allowing the return of species that were once heavily harvested, like the sheep's head, which is a wrasse down in Southern California, spiny lobsters, but it also allows longer-lived species like lingcod, some of the rock cod, to recover in areas that do not have the additional pressure of direct human extraction. So in Shark Watch, we actually had divers that are collecting data, as well as collecting data with remote operating vehicles provided by Trident, and looking at this benthic richness and habitat and the change over 10 years. So we just passed our decadal review. The conclusion is that they're working. They're not 100%. There are some exclusions of native peoples that need to be engaged. There's also impacts from climate change or nearshore runoff. So these MPAs are not the panacea, but if you take the fishing factor out, you've definitely managed one major factor on our oceans. Our other goal with Sharkwatch is to educate fishermen and ideally minimize this kind of behavior for sport, this catch and release, which ends up catch and kill because it stresses or harms sharks. And we saw, particularly during COVID, a lot of targeting on juvenile white sharks, which is illegal. So if you want to scan the QR code, if you see a shark, you can enter that shark. It'll give it a georeference off your phone. It'll also give you a little quiz if you want to learn about sharks. And then we have periodic contests. And we do Zooms at sharkstewards.org where you can win a hat or a shirt if you enter some data, or even a trip to the Farallon Islands with us on our Sharktober cruises. I'm one of the co-chairs with the state MPA collaborative. I've been involved with the MPAs in California for 16 years as a stakeholder, as one of the group who actually talked about protecting these areas and actually helping draw the lines. It was a stakeholder-driven process that had the community involved, including fishermen. The red areas are no-take. Sorry, I didn't put a map in of your region, but if you go up, there's Bodega, of course. And there are marine protected areas, for example, in Mendocino that are no-take reserves. Of course, you can't protect the ocean through a no-take reserve from climate change and impacts of sea surface temperatures, which you're experiencing with the kelp, the sea urchin, lack of sea otter conundrum, I guess, which is a human artifact. But these no-take reserves are in red. The blue are conservation areas, marine conservation areas, which allow some extraction recreationally by sports fishermen, but not by commercial. So as you can see, this whole rest of this coastline is available for fishing. These are the good areas, but they're not only the good areas. There's a lot of great fishing areas, as many fishermen will tell you, off of our coastline. So we have a question that we could put in the chat here. If everybody's awake, you can stand up and stretch and move your fingers. So what happened to the shark when he got famous? So we're going to have a contest, and you can win a free trip to the Farallon Islands with us this weekend, Saturday. The weather's glorious. We're seeing white sharks offshore. We're seeing a lot of humpbacks. We're collecting observations and data. We're seeing other things like sunfish. Our ROV is collecting data on the benthos. They're amazing wildlife trips. If you want to make your way down to Fisherman's Wharf, they're day long. But this is also an illustration of a children's book that I'm in the process of trying to get done. So what happened to the shark when he got famous? He put it in the chat. He became a starfish. So we have a youth program called the Starfish, where we do beach cleanups. We work with kids on learning about ocean solutions, collecting data using this Ocean Swell app, and teaching them community science and observations of wildlife in an urban environment like San Francisco Bay, and also suburban environment off of Berkeley, but and also down in Southern California. And you can adopt this program. We have kind of a paradigm that you can use, and it's a community science and community engagement, and a great way to create solutions, but also engage with youth and be part of the solution. I don't want to belabor some of our programs. We do collect data on sale and trade, sometimes legal, sometimes illegal, on legal platforms like eBay. We are talking to eBay right now about trade of wildlife parts of animals, particularly sharks or rays, sawfish, that are protected under the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species. Because as I said earlier, 1/3 of all sharks and rays are threatened with extinction. Many we do not have the data. They're data deficient. We're seeing more and more species in the shark fin market through DNA analysis in Hong Kong, particularly small sharks for shark fin soup, the hound sharks, the soup fin sharks. These sharks that are not protected at all are being caught in large numbers, and they may enter the endangered or critically endangered or threatened species list next once we have more data. So an important part of shark protection is not only protecting their habitat, but protecting them from wildlife trade, as well as educating the consumers. And why should we save sharks? We shouldn't fear them. We should fear for them. As apex predators, the big sharks regulate the trophic levels below them. In some cases, like tiger sharks and seagrass beds, they actually fix blue carbon and maintain the seagrass beds by moving their prey around, like the manatees and rays. Sharks are helping create a more dynamic and robust DNA of their prey populations. So they also fix blue carbon. So if you have a 5,000-pound great white shark and she goes offshore and lives her life out to 75 or plus years, dies, sinks to the bottom, it's like a whale fall. It's fixing carbon. That 5,000 pounds ends up in the benthos. It gets eaten. It gets fixed in the biota, or it gets fixed in the carbon and the sediments, and it doesn't end up in the atmosphere. So by increasing this large shark populations back to what they were, particularly the oceanic species or the migratory species like hammerheads, we might be able to add hundreds of thousands of tons of blue carbon through just allowing the ocean to get healthier, instead of these crazy engineering solutions like trying to pump things down into the sediments of the ocean and not knowing what the impacts are. So let's start with keeping what we have, what nature evolved over hundreds of millions of years, and maybe we can help mitigate some of these problems and maintain some of the healthy prey populations. Also, restoration, particularly of seagrass beds, is really critical. They're less than 10% of our sea bottom, but they provide 10% of the global carbon sink. So they pay seagrass and surf grasses actually have a over proportionate impact on climate, as do the large sharks have on the health of the ocean. They have a much more over proportionate role. So impacting these species have a much more negative impact on those ecosystems. So sharks have been around a long time. The rates are alarming. 355 of those 1,500 or so species are threatened with extinction. They've lost a lot of their habitat. What is alarming and what we are working on are the oceanic species, where oceanic white tips, for example, once the most abundant large shark in the open ocean, less than 2% in the Pacific. So there's a lot that we can do to protect them. So here's question 2 for the chat. You're still awake. Um, who am I, this shark? I actually gave you the answer earlier. We see them in the San Francisco Bay. We see them down off La Jolla Cove. They are a Northeast Pacific species. They're also in the Atlantic. And you should remember this one because they're also called the tope shark or school shark, but we call them the soup fin shark because that's what they're used for. So moving on, local fisheries protections. We were able to work with California Fish and Wildlife and some of the fishermen off the south coast, Santa Barbara down to LA. The drift gillnet fishery is now gone. It's the last drift net fishery in U.S. waters. Now we're working on the set net gear that also entrains sharks, mini sharks, more sharks than sea bass or swordfish, to switch out to more sustainable gear so that fishermen can fish, they can provide fish to a market, get paid a fair market price, as well as reduce bycatch of sharks and the air breathers like seals, sea lions, sea turtles, and seabirds. The shark fin trade, the way we're mostly working on it, we've already regulated it. We led the state movement. Shark Stewards worked with Cory Booker on the U.S. Shark Fin Sales Elimination Act that was signed into law by President Biden in the winter of 2022. That went through 4 Congresses. The previous administration, he who shall not be named, said he would veto it. He does not like sharks. He'd prefer dying by electrocution or electric boat than a shark. But sharks are important for the health of the ocean. And finally, this was passed through. So we are now banned the sale and trade of shark fin. And now we really need to regulate it through enforcement, as well as work with other countries. I talked about marine protection, community engagement, our 17th sanctuary. We're working on an 18th at the the Papahanaumokuakea National Marine Sanctuary, which is now a monument, but if it becomes a sanctuary, there'll be better fisheries protection, better science, better marine debris removal, and this is the healthiest, most intact coral reef in the North Pacific off the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. It is also a cultural heritage site. So what do a shark and a computer have in common? I'll give you a minute to put it in the chat. There's a little joke down here. My life's dream is to see a great white shark. I get that a lot. People want to come out with us on trips like this. I took this picture at Guadalupe Island. This is a way to educate people as well as collect data on sharks. But someone said their dream is to see a great white shark before they die, but not just before they die. So the answer, of course, is both white sharks and computers have megabytes in common. So we'll look at the chat if you want to join us on a trip to the Farallones. We will announce the winner over by email. I'll send it to Trey. If you'd like to get a ticket, you can go to sharkstewards.org. We have a few more trips. We only go during Sharktober when the weather's the best, the whales are the most abundant, and the aggregation of white sharks are there feeding on pinnipeds off the Farallon Islands in our National Marine Sanctuary. So that sums it up. Lastly, I do have a new film called Kahumano, which is Hawaiian for the Shark Keepers. We hope that we can show it maybe in person at the Noyo Center. It's on the Film Festival of the Wildlife Conservation Network now, but we are changing it to support the Papahanaumokuakea National Marine Sanctuary designation in 2025 that will be going to the Congress. So follow us on our social media or our website. There's a petition there that you can also sign in support, or you can volunteer for groups like the Noyo Center and donate or support Shark Stewards. We have a lot of volunteers, a lot of petitions, and of course we are a nonprofit. relying on grants and donations. Oh, I have a final question for the grand prize. Oop. What is the most recent scientific estimate of the adult and subadult white shark population off Central California? This was done by Dr. Paul Kanive, Taylor Chappell, Scott Anderson, and others. And they looked at the abundances through photo ID, through tagging, and through 15 years of study. We used to think these sharks had a much larger population, but in reality, it's quite small. This confirms an estimate of a study that was done about 7 or 8 years earlier by Sal Jorgensen. And the question is, what's the most recent estimate of adults and subadults? Again, I said most of the juveniles and young years are down south, but they are moving north off of Monterey during that blob and El Nino 2016 to 2018. And we now see a resident small group of sharks off Santa Cruz, Monterey. So who knows? Maybe we will be seeing a larger population of that young, but the estimate is 300 approximate adult and subadults with 50 mature females. That's not very many if you think about it. And most of those are off of the Farallon Islands, Point Arena, Año Nuevo, and Tomales Bay. So happy Sharktober. There's me out at the Devil's Teeth educating, and that's also part of our marine protected areas. I'm teaching a class, which is actually still open at the College of Marin, just started last night. If you want to make your way down in person on marine policy and protection of wildlife and habitat along the Marin coastline. And you can get this lecture writ large. So thanks again for listening. Here are programs where you can help. And of course, you can follow us. Oh, there's a book I wrote. We have a film day in San Francisco on our marine protected areas, December 7th at the Bay Model. A lot going on during Sharktober, because this is when we do our big education outreach. So I need to thank our sponsors as well as you for listening. And you can follow us on social media. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. That was a fantastic talk. We've got a few questions in the chat that I'm going to run by you. And then if we still have a little more time, we will just people can raise their hands and we can go into a more informal mode. So the first question is somebody asked, Ruth Stadnick asked, how are the shark fins used?
Shark fin is a delicacy. It's made in a soup that is primarily Chinese, but also Southeast Asian. It's the dish of the Emperor Sung 1,000 years ago. It was consumed primarily as a delicacy by emperors and nobility, but it became de rigueur, or whatever the Chinese equivalent is, since the transition between communism to social communism, capitalism in the past 20 years. So there are more middle class, more consumers in China, more people with consumable income. And so with that became a demand for many products, but including this delicacy, shark fin soup. It's associated with wealth. It's associated with honor and generosity. It's typically consumed at luncheons, business dinners, weddings, occasions of high honor. And it's very, very expensive because it has to be soaked, the skin has to be removed. And of course, what this led to is a gold rush, because the fin has the value of about 1,000 times or more of the value of the flesh. And so it's easy to kill a shark, cut off its fins, and transport and sell the fin, and that's called shark finning. Shark finning is largely condemned. It's illegal in over 100 countries. It's condemned by the United Nations, but sometimes it still occurs. Of course, it's hugely wasteful. But what we're seeing is it's still driving overfishing. And again, as I mentioned, we're seeing more small sharks killed and harvested legally, perhaps, or the whole shark is landed. So it's not shark finning, but it's the fin that is driving the decline of the shark species because of that high value. A big part of what we needed to do, and we did, is educate Chinese Americans and bring in young Chinese Americans or Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders who were abhorrent at the practice of shark finning and who did not want shark fin, and who, are more modern thinking and told their elders, hopefully, and will not become those elders, that shark fin is not part of their culture. We need to import into China or export that ethos that sharks are better off alive than dead, and we don't need them for their luxury items. In this case, like elephant ivory or like rhino tusk, it's killed for their body part, and it's causing a huge impact on species.
Great. Thanks, David. Another question we have here from Robert Spies. Protected areas are only as effective as enforcement efforts. How extensive is enforcement in California and elsewhere?
Well, I would say underfunded. There are only about 4 wardens that we share from San Francisco up to Mendocino and inland. So those are the same wardens that are trying to catch poachers shooting deer out of season. So they're up in the Sierra, they're down into the ocean, people getting abalone at night. Um, so it's difficult, which is why community science can be very, very helpful. And there are several docent programs. There's the Beach Watch program under the National Sanctuary. There's MPA Watch that are adopted by our California Collaborative, where people walk the beach and they educate either perhaps recreational fishers who are fishing in a protected area. So that goal is to not have enforcement, to educate before it gets there. Enforcement, you're right, is a real problem. I think Fish and Wildlife, they're dedicated, they do their best, they're underfunded, underpersoned, and so it's, I guess to answer your question, it's better than most places in the world, but it's still a problem.
All
Even
right.
if you look at a large area like a national marine sanctuary, which is over 5,000 square miles, it's very difficult to enforce. In the US, we have satellites, we have the Coast Guard, we have the Navy enforcing our waters offshore. The Papahanaumokuakea is some of the most rich and abundant tuna grounds in the Pacific and have some of the healthiest populations. And it's a real task. So it's why we need to encourage Congress to fund NOAA, who also does enforcement, to support our Fish and Wildlife. They're not bad guys, you know. They're really great, actually, and they're very informed and very passionate and often put themselves at risk to protect our wildlife.
Okay. The third question we have is what kind of data does the species pie chart represent?
Of which species, sorry?
As Zane Colfax asked, what kind of data does the species pie chart represent?
Oh. Uh, well, the data is collected, this data is collected through social media. And so we look on Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat posts and record by the horse's mouth or the fisherman's mouth what they're catching, what species it is. Either if we can identify it through the photograph, by location, because typically they're geo-referenced. So by monitoring hundreds of social media accounts, we were able to identify catch. This is all, oh, I'm sorry. This is the wrong pie graph. This is the eBay. So in this case, Mako shark jaws, these are all jaws because these animals are already dead. These are on eBay. So you can see that silky sharks are protected under CITES, Mako sharks are protected under CITES, hammerheads are protected, great whites are, and some species of rays. And so these should not be allowed to be sold without provenance, without a permit tracking where it was caught, how it was caught under international law, which is also adopted by the US. I don't know, I forget, sorry. I kind of altered this talk tonight for you. I don't think I have any Shark Watch catch data in here, but we do, it's not in here. But we do have Shark Watch data, which is what I talked about earlier through social media. And we published a report with some UC Berkeley students and sent it to Cal Fish and Wildlife, showing that there's an alarming amount of great white sharks being caught for sport, in many cases killed. And it is illegal to catch and kill a white shark in state waters as well as federal waters. So that pie chart, which is not in this talk, but it actually is recorded on a YouTube talk under our Shark Stewards YouTube channel, that we have a pie chart that shows by species caught, and those are reported either by the fishermen or confirmed visually by people who can identify the shark.
Okay. And I have a question. I was
Mhm.
on Cape Cod, and it's so sharky there now. Had no
Yeah.
idea, and really got addicted to the app Sharktivity. And I was wondering if there's anything existing like that on the West Coast where you can monitor or get reports in real time about shark activity on the West Coast.
No, there's not. Barbara Block, the top program, at one point did have shark tracking, and we went to her and we wanted to help and actually had a little bit of a grant that we were writing, but she wanted all the animals, meaning the all the other sharks and all the other um, pinnipeds that they're tagging, and we just couldn't swing it. I think it's a great way to educate and engage people. In some cases, I think those apps, particularly OSearch's app, and OSearch is a group that I think under the guise of science is really about Shark Week and shark sensationalism. They were on the West Coast, but basically got voted off the island and the sanctuary because of their fairly invasive shark tagging techniques by putting them on this boat and bringing them on a platform. Sharktivity, I think, is Greg Scomal's or the Atlantic Shark Conservancy's app. Greg is he's a scientist with Department of Fish and Wildlife in Massachusetts and with Atlantic Shark Conservancy. He's a really good scientist. Yeah, and you're seeing those near shore. I wouldn't say it's any sharkier than it used to be, but what we're seeing is a resurgence, just like we are off the West Coast, a return of that population. And with warmer sea surface temperatures, you're seeing a movement north off the Cape. And there's an alarming, people are getting freaked out off the Hamptons. The poor rich people can't use their beach without seeing a shark. This is basically also in response to protection of the pinnipeds, their food. So the gray seals off the East Coast have expanded significantly, and you see them rafting out off the Cape and northwards, as far north as Nova Scotia. And so this is about a human caused problem of overfishing pinnipeds, the seals and sea lions, also overfishing the sharks. First, we protected the marine mammals. So they've got a little bit of a head start. And so they're recovered first. The predators are coming behind them. And now we're starting to see more sharks move north. I wouldn't say it's sharky. There is not a significant increase statistically in white shark attacks. There are most of the shark human interactions are off Florida and the Carolinas by other species, not by white sharks. But we are seeing them near shore because that's where the people are and that's where the food is. But no, to answer your question, we don't have that app here. I think it would be great. We did have something off of Ocean Beach, off of San Francisco, using Twitter, kind of an alert. And surfers had the coconut telegraph, and we do share on social media. If you've seen a shark, report it. Fish and Wildlife will actually, or some cities will actually post the beach. Usually it's like a sewage spill. You test it 2 days or 3 days later, you've been swimming in it until they post it. So it's not the most timely. I'd love to see if there's anybody who's an entrepreneur. I've spoken to several people. There is the data set if we could get the scientists to share it. That's the other problem. A lot of times the scientists don't want to share their data until they published it. And that is a problem because in real time, we can't access it. So you need to have somebody like Greg or even OSearch who's willing to just publish where their sharks are, because they're also getting a return either through shark adoptions or through apps, or I'm not sure if Atlantic Shark Conservancy is getting any money off public safety. They should. Chris Lowe down at Cal State Long Beach, the Shark Lab got quite a bit of funding from the state for their education program and alerting people about the risk of sharks and supporting the lifeguards down there using drones to uh, increase awareness. We haven't seen that off of our coastline.
All right. Great. Well, thank you. Is there anybody that wants to raise their hand or throw any more questions in the chat before we wrap up for the night? Looks like everybody got their questions answered. That's great. Can you tell us just one more question, a little more this research, the trip you go out on the Farallon Islands? You mentioned a few of the species that we can hope to see. Yeah, just tell us a little more about what that day is like for the people here. I mean, this is a good group to invite out to go
Uh,
there. So
They're much like the whale watch trips that are out of Bodega Bay, and there may even be some in Mendocino. I'm not familiar, but
there are a
um,
few. It's very weather dependent, but
yeah, well, here
it is
too, but
great.
not as much as
Yeah.
up there, which is why we only do it this month. We had beautiful weather last weekend. This weekend is supposed to be just glass. But sometimes, we have to cancel trips. We won't go out if it's windy and uncomfortable. But we start out in the bay and we see recovery of the bird colonies that are now nesting off Alcatraz, um, the the herring population and anchovy that are coming into the bay. So we see feeding of gray whales, the harpos, the harbor porpoises, which is a huge recovery of the small marine mammal, small cetacean. There are over 300 identified now that are residents in the bay. Humpbacks, of course, right near the bay. And then anything goes. Like we see sei whales, Bruta whales, occasionally beaked whales, very rare. We saw fin whales, the spouts, humpback galore. I mean, there are, it's estimated anywhere between 1,500 and 3,000 of these whales that migrate up off our coast each summer to feed off of the forage fish. And we see hundreds off of our coastline. And so part of what we do is we take pictures of the underside of the fluke and add those to happy whale and identify. And we've identified some new individuals on our trips, which is really fun. And then when we get to the island, we talk about the history of the island, of course, birds. 250,000 seabirds use the Farallon Islands for nesting habitats, the largest rookery off of North America outside or off the west coast outside of Alaska and the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. So, puffins and murres and all kinds of amazing birds, as well as migratories or visitors like the Laysan albatross, the pink-footed shearwaters that come from South America, shearwaters from that come as far as New Zealand. These ocean voyagers come off of our coastal upwelling ecosystem to feed. And then we're always looking for sharks, predation events, or like yet last week, one just jumps near the boat because they're there. And then also looking at the fur seals and the elephant seals and talking about the human history, the impacts, as well as the significant impacts on the positive sense that we've made through our fish and wildlife refuge system, through our national marine sanctuary, through our California marine protected areas, and through our wildlife protection laws. So it's a triumph. And so I talk about all of that. It's like the policy class. I talk about the history of exploitation and the turnaround that we are experiencing because of people like y'all who love and care about these species and want to protect them and where they live.
Well, fantastic, David. Thank you so much. That was a very, very interesting talk. And I hope everybody here goes on to Shark Stewards and makes a nice donation and gets out on the boat and goes to the Farallon Islands because it's completely incredible out there. And if you haven't already, we would be very grateful at Noyo Center to receive your donation for participating in this and to help us keep these great talks going. So thank you everybody for being a part of it. And that's what I got. That's what we have all got. So thank you.
Great. Thanks very much for hosting us. Happy Sharktober.